This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, Bob Goodman, is a television writer-producer who most recently served as executive producer on the hit CBS TV series Elementary. And before that, he wrote and produced on Syfy's Warehouse 13. Prior to his work in live action, Bob wrote for many years in animation, primarily as a staffer at Warner Brothers. His credits include Batman, Superman, Batman Beyond, Justice League Unlimited, and Ben 10. Plus, he created and ran the Batman Beyond spin-off, the Zeta Project. He's written web series and video games, including the Dungeons & Dragons game Demon's Stone, and several direct-to-DVD animated features, including the two-part Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. Bob has received 2 Daytime Emmy Awards, as well as an Annie Award nomination for individual achievement in writing. He currently has a pilot in development at ABC. For the record, though we've never had the pleasure of working together, Bob and I have known one another for many years. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm truly thrilled to welcome the great writer and my friend Bob Goodman to StoryBeat today. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve.
It's a great pleasure to have you, believe me. So we're going to go back to your beginning just a little bit. How did you get into writing in the first place? What inspired you at obviously an early age to get into writing and being a writer?
Sure. Well, the early age part is I always think a little challenging because we're all just doing a little self psychoanalysis when we think about that. But I certainly was that kid in my family who was always the entertainer, the one who made everyone happy in tougher times and did little skits next to the television set in the living room.
Right.
Somewhere around 13 years old, my mom, who had her own prior career as a secretary, gave me an old typewriter, and I sort of holed myself up down in the basement and started typing little short stories.
Wow.
So that's probably the beginnings of the time as a writer.
Were you a class clown?
I was definitely a class clown, and beyond that, a class troublemaker. One of the sort of formative moments that I remember is my 7th grade social studies teacher chastised me in front of the whole room once by stopping the class and barking at me. Mr. Goodman, you are never going to make a living staring out the window daydreaming.
Oh, how wrong she was.
Yes, how wrong he was. It is exactly how I make my living now. It is literally what I do for a living now.
I like to sometimes describe for people what it looks like to see a writer working, and then I'll just pause and lean back and look at the ceiling for a while. Yeah. I mean, that's what it looks
exactly
like.
Right. I describe it as just staring at the ceilings. That's 90-something% of the writing process is laying back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I have a writer that I worked with on Elementary, who I heard say on a panel once, if someone put a surveillance camera in his office, most of the time it would look like he was stealing money from CBS.
I think that's pretty accurate for pretty much every screenwriter.
I have to imagine it makes it very difficult for the bean counters, for the business affairs people, to control or quantify anything. I once went to real loggerheads, if that's the right term, with a newly installed president of the studio at Warner Brothers Animation, sort of toward the end of my tenure, not the studio head that I worked with most of my time. who was really trying to do this, trying to quantify everything, trying to, make the timesheets more rigid and get people to come in on more, correct hours. And he had an expression, this job isn't flex time. And he and I really got into it when I was trying to explain to him, you have a team of dedicated, it was mostly the artists were the concern then, but writers and artists. These are people who are giving you the best they have, and it just kind of doesn't work on that schedule that you're imagining. These guys, they're putting in way longer hours after the supposed clock has been punched and at home, and if they don't come in right at 10 a.m., the truth is you're getting more than the required hours, not fewer than.
Well, you can't punch a clock as a writer, that's for sure.
Oh, there is none. There's another expression. Being a writer is having homework every day for the rest of your life.
Yes, that's true. That's a good one. I'd never heard that. That's good. That every day is a is sort of a brand new thing, isn't it?
Yeah, every day. Yeah, it's there's no turning it off, or at least there's no rigidity to turning it on and off.
No.
It makes having a life a special challenge, and you need a very understanding life partner. My wife, I'm lucky, is very, very understanding and knows what she got into.
Well, the good news is if you do well, as you've done, you can also make some money.
Yes.
So that's the
right.
That's the compensation.
Not a guarantee.
Right. Sure.
But yes, that's right. The good news is when it works out, you're doing something you obviously chose to do and enjoy doing, and if you're honest in it, you put some of yourself on the page and somehow manage to synthesize that with delivering something a customer wants too. And that's maybe one of the biggest challenges, is finding the bridge between those two things. Then you can have a good life.
Well, that's for sure. If you're lucky enough to hit it, then the compensation can be good. Otherwise, there are lots of starving writers. That's for sure. So, what got you started into animation? That was where you really first broke in. Yes.
That's right.
How did you get in there?
It was kind of kismet. I had gone to film school at NYU. And my wife and we got married young, so it was really the next chapter heading right after NYU. We met there. We were living in New York City, and both had dreams, as plenty of people do, of being independent filmmakers, that we'd be a team. I was the writer-director, and she was the producer, and it was sort of the heyday of the indie Sundance scene, and we thought we'd make it as a feature team in New York City.
Right.
And somewhere several years into that, kind of an embarrassing number of years into it, I kind of realized there's no career here. There's no there here. And if I really wanted to do this, if I wanted to be, at that point it was still in movies, I needed to move out to Los Angeles. Right. And we had that conversation and agreed that, okay, we'll start, sort of a process. We'll start thinking about moving out to LA. And within days of having that conversation and not sharing it with anyone, a friend named Don Lipper, who at the time was Alan Burnett and Paul Dini's assistant on Batman the Animated Series, called me and said, I'm transferring departments here in Warner Brothers. To give you a sense of of dating it, he was transferring to a new department they were opening called Warner Brothers Online, this new internet thing. Did I want him to set me up to take his job? And so it really was the universe, affirming the choice. I suddenly had a job waiting for me when we got there, and within a month of that phone call, I was out here in LA and started working for Warner Brothers Animation. Wow,
that is kismet.
Yep. And from there, I started as Alan and Paul's assistant. There was maybe a brief time where I was a floater, so I also did some work assisting Tom Ruger on the comedy side. at Warner Animation on Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain, and Freakazoid was just getting started up then too. But primarily, I was earmarked, if you could say that about a person, from day one to be Alan and Paul's assistant. And they were just starting up the Superman animated series at the time. Like the Bible was going around right at the time that I started. And they were nice enough to read a spec feature that I had written and watch my student film from NYU, and gave me a freelance very early on, and that freelance led to more freelances and freelances on another show. And very quickly, Alan and Paul made me a staff writer on Superman, and I kind of climbed the ladder from there.
And you're one of those, I don't want to say typical, but there is a path that many people have followed by becoming an assistant first, and you're proof of that, are you not?
Yeah, that's right. It is. I think you qualified it well. That it's one of the archetypal ways that a writer might get a career going. It's at the same time, no two stories are alike, but that's certainly one of the tried and true doors in. Is starting out as an assistant, a production assistant, what's called a script coordinator, which is the person who formats and distributes the scripts as the writers write them, and make sure everything is in sync with production and everybody's working with the right draft. So that's another job that's an entry point for writers. And then the other one is fellowships and competitions and the writer programs that all the studios and networks out here have. Those will give you a chance to meet people, start making contacts, and they very often help place you with a job as you graduate from them.
I was going to say all those jobs, especially the jobs, are valuable in many ways because you really get to learn how things work first before you just get thrown in the soup.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's really true of any job someone can get in showbiz. I think the way someone should look at a job search, this really goes for any field, not just entertainment. Someone gave me this advice very early on, and I've always found it to be true, is try to get in the door any way you can around the people you want to be working with. In that world, even if it's not exactly doing the thing you think you want to be doing. One, probably if your aspirations are high enough, you can't get a job right away doing the thing you want to do.
Right.
But like you say, one, you're going to learn the lay of the land. You're going to be watching the people who are doing what you want to do. And equally important, you're going to be meeting the people who are going to be your support network.
Sure.
You're going to be meeting people who will help you get a job and will teach you things and will introduce you to other people and will help you get an agent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that goes for not just jobs as a writer's assistant, but getting a job in the mailroom at an agency or as an assistant to an executive. If you are lucky enough to get, as they say, on the phone or on the desk of someone who's in a good vantage spot in the industry to interact with other people, then you're going to get to interact with those people and impress them and make those relationships. And you acquit yourself well with that executive or agent or writer who you are serving, then they're going to speak well of you, and they're going to call someone who maybe already has some association with you and say, hey, this assistant of mine is looking really to do what you're doing. Can you, help them make that transition? And
it's really all about, more than anything else, clearly you have to have talent if you're going to stay in that business at all, but it's really about those relationships that you meet, the people that you get to know, and whether they like you or not, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Steve, you mentioned in the intro that you and I know each other for many years. I was thinking the lion's share, if not all, of our interactions have been at the Writers Guild of America West Animation Writers Caucus events.
Absolutely.
Were you at the event where we gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to Sam Simon, creator of The Simpsons?
I was already in Pittsburgh at that time.
So someone at that presentation, it may have been Sam himself, said quoted his rule about making it in Hollywood, and it's that success in our business is a combination of 5 things in this order: dumb luck, hard work, tenacity, who you know, and then maybe talent.
That's right. That's correct.
And so notice that who you know is, one up there in the top 5 list, and above talent.
Yeah, for sure.
Networking is a whole other full-time job that writers have to think about. They have to. You can't just write and think that the world is going to discover your writing. Nor can you think that the proverbial cold call or letter is going to get someone to pay attention to your writing.
No, not anymore.
What gets people to pay attention to your writing is relationships.
Yeah, for sure.
And you need as many of those as you can get.
Yeah, it really is a business of relationships. Hollywood is replete with stories of people who are middling talented but are well connected in work. And so I think that it is really about, and we teach that here at Point Park all the time, that it really is about who you know, at least as much, if not more, than what you know. Though again, you got to know something. You have to have some ability. So I think that's valuable. All right, so you spent a lot of years at Warner Brothers. What was, briefly, what was your favorite show to work on?
My favorite show to work on. Well, that's tough, and I'll mention too that maybe the tie is over one's definition of favorite.
Yeah.
Obviously, I got to create and run my own show, the Zeta Project, and it's tough to beat that experience.
Sure.
If one's goal in this business, and isn't necessarily this, but if your goal is self-expression, getting to say what you want to say to the world, then having your own television show is a really great way to do it.
Yeah.
And I got to work as with all the shows that I did at Warner's with wonderful people, and had just a really great time doing that. But I also have to talk about Batman Beyond. I should give a sort of a sense of a landscape here. When I was there at Warner's, first of all, there were kind of two camps of shows. There were the comedy shows, and there you can think of the talking animals and fun music. And at the time, Warner's was making, as I mentioned before, Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain and Freakazoid and Tasmania, and just a whole slate of incredible shows. And then we had the second group that we referred to as the Men in Tights. There was a little core group of writers, and obviously a team of fantastic artists led by Bruce Timm, that were basically doing all the superhero shows and only superhero shows. And we kind of would meet the other teams over weekly staff meetings, but basically at lunches, but not really commingle that much. And so that was the corner of the building that was headed by Alan Burnett and Paul Dini,
mm-hmm.
and on the art side, Bruce. And there was this team of just a couple of writers, literally, one handful of writers, Stan Berkowitz, Rich Fogel, Hilary Bader, and myself. And we basically moved from show to show as a unit. And so for a period of about 7 years, we did 4 shows really, I think, all together, where like the group just never changed. And then it started to splinter. Maybe it was 3 shows.
Right.
Superman, Batman, and Batman Beyond. And then we started, splintering off into Zeta Project, Static Shock, and Justice League. But it was still that same core group of writers.
Right.
So part of this, mentioning this, is the rarity of it, that I was working with a single group of writers for 7 years over multiple shows.
That is rare.
You don't get that sort of job stability in
No.
entertainment or anywhere else these days.
No.
And 2, to even distinguish a favorite show is tough, because it was the same team on every one of the shows. But what I will say is I think Batman Beyond was the peak of quality during that time. We really were all continuing to learn and push ourselves, and the production quality got better, and the Bruce and his team were always learning how to do it better, and we were growing as writers, and never letting ourselves repeat ourselves. So that's a list, if you put all those together, of north of 200 episodes. And it wasn't just someone saying, well, we did that before on this show. We would say, no, we did that before on Batman, when we were on Batman Beyond. We did it on Superman. So we kept finding newer, creative ways to tell stories. And I really do think that Batman Beyond was the pinnacle of quality during that time.
I would agree with you. I had the great good fortune to write a single episode of The Batman, which was along with Alan Burnett. So that was a lot of fun for me. And then other Warner Brothers shows I did were Lunatics Unleashed and Shaolin Showdown. But that was beyond that. That was later than when you were working, correct?
Correct. I did write an episode of The Batman as well, and I was looking at your IMDb page before this conversation, and that is our one intersection, I believe. Mm-hmm. The one show we worked on that we both did,
but not together.
Working for/with Alan Burnett is one of the greatest experiences that a writer can have.
I agree.
He's the most gracious, gentlemanly, supportive boss you can have.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to say he was my second interview on this podcast. So he was gracious enough to come on this show when I literally had no clue what I was doing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you did great.
He did.
That sounds like Alan.
Yeah.
And then your audience has already had a taste of it. He is my mentor in this business. My surrogate dad figure. It happened that not to bring the room down, but my dad passed away right around when Alan was giving me that first leg up in the business, and I was thousands of miles away from my family, having moved to LA from New York, and Alan and his wife kind of became my surrogate parents out here, and he taught me how to comport oneself in this business.
Well, you learned from the very, very best. That is for sure.
Correct.
And that makes you a lucky man.
How much I learned, that's up for debate. But the teacher's credentials are irrefutable.
Impeccable. All right, so I want to move beyond animation, because obviously the last bunch of years you managed to find your way into live action. How did you get off onto Syfy or into on Syfy Channel's Warehouse 13? How'd that happen?
So first, not to skip it, there's a decision to step away from animation.
Yeah, your decision.
Remember early. Yes, my decision to step away from animation. Although I will say that the universe helps. You'll recall from the beginning of this that I originally came out here to write movies, and the job in animation was a blessed happenstance, but a happenstance. And after having run my own show, which it might surprise people, can also have a way of souring one to the work at the same time.
Yeah.
it was a tough slog with the regime at that time at the Kids WB network. It was getting difficult to tell the stories that not only stories that I wanted to tell, but stories that I thought would be good. The business itself was changing. I'm sure you can relate that the money was kind of falling out in terms of an animation writer really being able to make a good living. And it was kind of a kick in the pants for me to look around and say, this wasn't what I came here to do. And so I stepped away from animation and went back home to my desk to write spec scripts. And at first that was writing spec features, and then I sort of looked around, and this is another lesson for people that when they move out to Los Angeles and think they know exactly what they want to do in Hollywood, sometimes it takes a few years for you to meet the people that that you click with and to find what it is you exactly want to do in this business. You might come out here and think you want to be a director, and it turns out you want to be an agent, or who knows. Excellent
advice.
And I kind of noticed, the work that I liked, meaning when I watched TV and movies, was 1-hour dramas. The people that I was clicking with were 1-hour drama writers. The kind of career that I wanted to have in terms of hours and job stability and frequency of work was in 1-hour dramas. And so I focused on getting into 1-hour dramas. And it took a number of years. At that point, as the first part of our conversation attests, I had a long and successful resume as an animation writer and a lot of years under my belt. I was in my late 30s by the time that I was trying to make this transition.
Right.
And so the world, the Hollywood community would look at my resume and assume that animation writing was all I could do.
It pigeonholed you.
I was pigeonholed. And so it took a bunch of years to convince an agent to represent me, to get a show to hire me, but eventually I lucked out. And this is maybe the most typical part of the story, almost to the point that there's almost a Yogi Berra ism. So typical that it's not true of anyone. That when you first start breaking into a given business, like a niche of the business, like 1 hours or half hours, whatever you're doing, and you have an agent, hopefully that agent is sending you out on what are called general meetings, and you spend, in my case, and it's often true, years just driving around town meeting executives. And these meetings feel like they're going nowhere. I refer to it as my water bottle collection run.
Yes.
Basically, everywhere you go, they give you a little bottle of water, and those bottles of water collect on the seat of your car because you carry them out with you because you don't want to leave garbage behind. And you just get a car full of water bottles, and it doesn't look like your career is going anywhere. But what you hope, and it really did work out this way in my case, is one of those executives, a guy named Tom Lieber, was a fan of my work on Batman. We had a great meeting. He remembered me, and a year and a half after that meeting, he was the point person sort of advising on what writers to hire on this new show called Warehouse 13.
Wow.
And he put my name in. He said, Bob's one of the right guys for this job.
Wow.
And I got the job.
Wow. That's, so, as you said in your list of 5, one of those items was luck. And dumb luck, and there's a second case of it for you where you had the luck coming out to L.A. and then luck finding going to a meeting. Of course, what you're saying, which I also teach here, what you're saying is that you need to take a lot of meetings and get to know a lot of people, and that can bear fruit. But that's about the only way to get there is to meet a lot of people, and that's what you did.
That's exactly right. The sort of footnote, if you put a little asterisk next to that comment about dumb luck, is you create your own luck.
Yes.
That's not to diminish the other point you were making, which is I've been crazy lucky, and it's not just those 2 examples. Things, someone might look at my career and think, "Wow, this took Bob a long time to get where he got," but a lot of people. It never happens, and so I've been very, very fortunate on many, many occasions.
Well,
but a piece of that is that, luck is created by at-bats. Luck is a numbers game.
Yeah.
And you have to keep meeting people, keep writing, keep putting yourself out there. It's always been my adage that when the career isn't going the way you think it is, when you're not getting the job you think you should be getting, when people think of you as this, when you want them to think of you as that, the answer to the question, what should I be doing, is always write another sample. And then part two is get it out there. Be meeting with people, be making friendships. You can't ask someone to read your script because you met them at a party once, or because you went to talk to them at the end of a panel. The people you ask to read scripts and help you are the relationships you've made. And that doesn't happen overnight.
No, and to add to the witticisms about luck, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson who famously said, "The harder I work, the luckier I get." And you're a case of that. You continued to ply your trade. You didn't give up.
Right. Am I getting this right? That there's a. Well, I think I was about to mix up stories, but what I was going to say is someone has said that luck is preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah, that's also true. And
right, and so you, those are, once you've broken it down into those two halves, those are two things that are in your power to nurture,
yes,
to
sure.
build.
Sure.
You have to make the opportunities, and you have to be prepared.
That is 100% correct, because if you think that you're going to go to Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, wherever it is you want to go, and the world is just going to welcome you with open arms and invite you in, well, then I have a bridge in Arizona I'd like to sell you. But you have to go work it. You have to work it.
And it takes time.
So, all right, so you were on Warehouse 13 for how long? 4 or 5 years?
5 years.
5 years.
Another example of my luck. I said about that Warner Brothers thing that the job stability is a rarity in Hollywood. Not to jump ahead, we'll talk about Warehouse 13, but I've been lucky enough to have unbelievable job stability, which is unbelievable luck, 3 times. My entire career, and I'm 25 years now into a television writing career.
With 3 jobs.
Those 25 years are mostly, the lion's share of it is 3 jobs.
That's amazing.
Warner Brothers Animation for 7 years, and then Warehouse 13 for 5 years, and then Elementary for 6 years.
Other than Alan Burnett being at one place for, 30 years, I don't know anyone else that's been as stable as what you're talking about. That's amazing.
It's very, very fortunate. Yes, Alan may very well hold the record for the longest employed writer in television.
That may be. at one place.
Well, at one place, but also moving around. He, you're right. He was at Warner Brothers for. I'm making up a number now, but something like 35 years.
Yeah.
Could that be right? No, that can't be right.
Yeah, it's
maybe 30 years.
It's 30, at least 30.
But he, prior to that, was at, and I don't forget the order right, Disney for a good stretch and Hanna-Barbera for a good stretch, and he probably talked on the podcast when he was your guest that he from his first day as an animation writer, he was never unemployed for a single day until he retired.
That's unheard of.
Unheard of.
Yeah, unheard of. So those of you listening to this out there, don't think that it's going to happen for you, but it could, but it would be super rare. Super rare.
Well, let's throw in, if you want it to happen, not only do you have to hit those 5 things that Sam Simon said, but to take Alan's lesson, you also have to be a mensch. And
you have to be a really, really good person. And he is. He's as good as they come. So, All right. So now you've been on Warehouse 13 for 5 years. And how many episodes did you churn out during that time?
The show was 54 episodes. I personally wrote, I don't know the number exactly, but I think it was something like 8 of those. Maybe 9. Some co-writings in there.
Did you staff write? Did you work on staff stuff as well, like punching up and rewriting and so on?
Yes, for sure. One, it was a writer's room show. Do your listeners and students know all about that?
They will, but explain it anyway. It's always good to hear your perspective.
Not every show does this, but many shows have what's called a writer's room, and basically it looks like a conference room from any other business with a big long table in the middle, and at least one wall, if not more, covered in white dry erase board. And most of the writers on a staff of a room show spend by far the vast majority of their time at work in this room, where the entire team, if that's a writing staff of 8 writers, or on comedies it can be much bigger numbers like 15 or more writers, helping break the entire season as a group and break the individual episodes as a group. And if I need to say by break, I mean get those beats of a story for an episode up on the whiteboard. And so everyone's really contributing to every episode as a team. Really, your imprint is, to a greater or lesser degree, on absolutely every episode, whether your name is on it or not. Then, as a story is broken, an individual writer or unit, meaning team of writers, is assigned to leave the writer's room and write first the outline and then the script of that episode. And that's really the only time that you're not in the room working with everyone else. Again, not every show does this, but that was the Warehouse 13 model. And maybe, I don't know, 75, 80% of shows operate that way.
Right, sure.
In addition to that, I was kind of a weird animal when I showed up at Warehouse 13 because of this odd career turn that I'd taken, where I'd, climbed the ladder from assistant to staff writer to running my own show and, creating a show in animation, and then having to start back at the bottom of the ladder in 1 hour. I started as a first-year staff writer again.
Yeah.
I was a first-year staff writer with the level of experience on a show and working on a staff and breaking story and writing polish of someone who'd run a show. And so the showrunner, another great teacher and fun, wonderful guy named Jack Kenny, saw that I had that experience, very quickly said, okay, it's obvious you're not a staff writer, and put me to work. Had me helping, do some polish on other scripts and help with other stories, and told the network at the end of season 1 that I really deserved to be promoted up the ladder quicker than would ordinarily happen, and they gave me what was called a double bump. There's a sort of rigid series of job titles that writers go through as they climb the ladder, and I got to skip a couple of them over the years on Warehouse 13.
And that took how long to get that double bump? Was it a year or 2?
So your students and listeners may know this, but the order generally is you start at staff writer, then your second year you're a story editor, then an executive story editor, then I think the next one is called co-producer, and then producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, and executive producer. And I'll not get into your answer yet, but a quick joke to throw in there. You notice a couple of them had co-producer and co-executive producer.
Yes.
There's a joke in TV that the prefix co means not.
It does.
So from that first year, after staff writer, I got to skip story editor and went straight to executive story editor.
Right.
And then again, after, I think I also skipped producer. I went from co-producer to supervising producer. So a couple of times in that process, I skipped a title.
Right. And all right, so now you've been on, and just for the sake of time, because we're running a little long, which is no problem, but you've been on this show for 5 years. Did you run right into elementary out of Warehouse 13?
I did, and again, it's another moment of great luck. Elementary was kind of the only show out there that I wanted to be on. I joked that I applied to an early decision, and there were people really worrying about me. Like, we were just saying how important it is to be out there taking meetings and the numbers game that you're playing. And I did all those meetings, but the one show that I was very clear that I wanted to be on was Elementary, and it looked like there wasn't going to be an opportunity. And then, just as luck would have it, a writer that they had hired, the contract negotiation fell through, and suddenly there was an opening again. And I pulled out, here's another lesson, pulled out all the stops on, finding people that I had a real relationship with, that I could ask this kind of favor from, who had a real relationship with the showrunner, Rob Doherty. Yeah. That's already a pretty limiting number. You don't ask anybody to bombard a person with emails.
Right.
But the people that it would really count from, I asked to contact Rob and put in a good word. And so he got a couple of recommendations, and read my writing and took the meeting. Another quick lesson about those meetings: you really have to let the person know. Don't be cagey that you want to be on their show. And that doesn't mean you go in there with a desperation, like, oh my God, you have to hire me, you have to hire me, you have to hire me. But go into a staffing meeting with an encyclopedic knowledge of their show. You've seen every episode. You have your own opinions and ideas. Again, with humility. Their opinions and ideas are more important than yours, but you plan to contribute.
Yeah.
And let them know you're going to work your butt off and make their life easier. I got all those things right in that meeting, and I got the job.
Well, I promise you, I'm not blowing smoke. It's one of the best shows I've ever watched. That was a great series, and really smart. Were you a big Sherlock fan prior to the show? I assume you were.
I was a Sherlock Holmes fan. I wasn't a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and I'm just being clear about that in the sense that I wasn't a collector of Holmesiana, and I didn't read a lot of Arthur Conan Doyle. It's a little sacrilege to say, but I actually at the time, just in terms of his prose, in terms of his style of writing, I actually didn't think he was a particularly good writer.
Mm-hmm.
I've since come to recognize the brilliance of what he was doing and the novelty of what he was doing at the time. He really was creating a genre.
Yeah.
Or arguably creating multiple genres, because you could say that the whole superhero genre came out of Arthur Conan Doyle's writing as well.
So one of the hallmarks of that show, obviously, is that it's a mystery show. I mean, you're dealing with a mystery every week, or a series of them over a course of several shows, however it was broken down. I know that you wrote a lot of the superhero shows, and those typically have some kind of mysteries in them. Were you always a mystery fan?
Yes. Again, it's not that was particularly the stuff that I read or watched any more than other things. But I certainly had an affinity for it. I did love them when I read them. I guess I was a big Agatha Christie fan, so there's that.
Right.
It's a kind of writing, and maybe this says things both limiting and good about my brain. It's a kind of writing that I take to, that I know how to do.
Well, there's a special kind of thinking going on there. That's not average thinking. You definitely. Do you tend to work from the conclusion backwards? Is that how you work things out, or how do you typically go at figuring out a mystery?
No, I don't tend to work from the conclusion backwards. In fact, sometimes the conclusion is one of the well, let me be clear about this. Who the killer is may or may not be something that comes up late in the game, but specifically how you get there isn't necessarily something that I start with.
You work your way to it.
I've always been a believer in letting the story come to me in whatever order it comes. Like sometimes people will ask, "Well, don't you start from character? Don't you start from what you want to say about your character going through this time?" And other people will ask, as you're saying, "Don't you start from, what the machinations of the mystery are?" And my answer is always, let the story come however it comes. They're hard enough to find. But as long as you check all the boxes by the time you're done. that you need to have told a story that actually mattered to your characters, and you need to tell a story that had good intricacies. But which one came first doesn't matter. But for me, mostly, particularly on Elementary, but it's been true on all the shows that I've worked on. I tend to start from something I want to talk about, something I want to say, an area that interests me. Another way that I've been very lucky is the way that my wife works with me in my career, and she was a development executive who now has become my own personal in-house development executive.
Nice.
She works only with me, and a lot of what she does is find articles and stories that she thinks I'll be interested in developing a story about. And so, particularly on Elementary, we were always looking for arcana. We were always looking for stories that discussed some weird corner of society or politics or technology that in a sense had that feeling of, a jar of weird little bones that you would find, on the shelf in 221B Baker Street. And so, between my wife finding articles for me or things that I decided I wanted to talk about, I got to do episodes about the rarity and value of the blue blood that people harvest from horseshoe crabs. It turns out that's of medical importance and monetary value.
Mm-hmm.
An episode about how people are making money off our fear of asteroids hitting the Earth. Things like that it's a very weird thing that you're not only getting a fun murder mystery, but I don't like to use the word learning like it's an educational show. It's always fun, but you're hearing about things you might not hear about on any other show, and that's part of the fun of a Sherlock Holmes story.
Well,
that's usually where they start for me.
You have the opportunity to go into corners of arenas that the general public may not know anything about. So it gives you those opportunities. I think what makes that particular show, like other shows like it, where there's a dance between the two leads, where the traditional Sherlock Watson relationship are two men, and here you've got this wonderful twist between a man and a woman, and there's all that tension as well. And I think that's what made that show really sing. That, and of course, you had some incredible actors in that thing as well.
Yes, on all counts. The second one first, Johnny and Lucy, were, just godsends in terms of, they are top of the list why the show was successful.
Oh, sure.
It's tough to admit as a writer, but 80% of the success of a television show is the charm of those actors.
Well, if you had them, go off and get married or something like that, it would have destroyed everything. I think that the way you played it was just right.
And that's to your first point. I don't take a lot of credit for. I take no credit for coming up with this. The only credit I can take is embracing it and helping figure out what to do with it. But,
sure.
Rob Doherty, the creator and showrunner of Elementary, yet another incredible, gracious, brilliant writer. He said from the get-go on this show that they will never hook up. That this was never going to be a will they won't they show.
Right.
That this was a bromance. It just happened to be between a man and a woman.
Oh, it's
a show about platonic love. Platonic friendship.
It's a great love story without any consummation of it in the physical sense. It's fantastic from that sense because that tension just helps tell that story, and the way that they played with each other was just as good as it gets. The two brilliant actors. Right.
Well, it's interesting. I don't say this to contradict you. It amuses me that you still speak about it as you're saying tension, and by that I think you mean
sexual tension.
Something in the neighborhood of sexual tension.
Yes, it's there.
Which I guess I kind of can't. I certainly am not qualified to dispute, and yet it was never the intention.
Oh, but you
know,
didn't. That was the brilliant part of it, Bob. There was no intention. You never went that way. But it was just playing underneath all the time, whether you intended it or not. And I think a lot of it had to do with those two actors who were never coming at each other in a sexual way, but the audience was always wondering if maybe there was something going on. They're living in the same house.
Right.
They're working together all the time. They clearly are at odds with each other a lot, and so are most married couples. So in a way, they were married without being married. So that's what made it so wonderful.
That I agree. It was a show about a marriage.
Yeah.
But the other fun thing to me that you are proving a thesis of mine, maybe one of Goodman's laws, that people are always asking, how do you create that will they won't they tension, or executives always want you to do more of it or hit it more on the nose when you are doing will they won't they work, and I assert that you actually can accomplish it doing absolutely nothing or even trying to fight against it. That it is just the nature of the human experience or being a viewing audience that you put two attractive, charming people on screen together, and the audience will provide their own sexual tension because we just naturally want to see those two people get together.
100%. I totally agree with that. And I think as I said a moment ago, I think what amps that up even further is they're living, I guess a floor away from each other in the same house. So, you'd think, well, and the character Sherlock is a sexual creature. He's, bedded two women at the same time and that sort of thing. So you'd think, well, I guess one night he would just wander down the hall, but he never does.
Right, but he would never do that because he always respected her boundaries.
Absolutely. Well, we've been. This has been a blast. We've been chatting we're heading toward an hour, which is a little longer than I wanted to go, but that's perfectly great. And so I'm going to ask you the last two questions I ask everyone. And the first is, in all of your experiences, you've already given us a couple of really great stories, including the one early on. Do you have a story that you can share that's either oddball, quirky, offbeat, just plain crazy or funny?
Well, I guess partly in the interest of time, I'll... like I said, I'd done a few I'd prepared a few to pick from. Sort of a fun celebrity encounter one, I'll tell you, which was when I got to work with George Segal.
Oh, yeah.
You may have worked with him too, I think. Is that right?
No, I never worked with George Segal, but I love George Segal.
Yeah, he's fantastic, and it happens that the shows that I've worked on. But at the point of this story was Warner Brothers Animation. I got to work with, just the best talent, and a dream list of actors. There was hardly anyone in the business that didn't want to work with Andrea Romano, our director, or work on those shows. So I'd already worked with names that I was very excited about, like Malcolm McDowell, and our leads were Dana Delaney and Tim Daly and Clancy Brown, just incredible actors all around.
Yeah.
Ed Asner. But George was the one who I really geeked out on the most. This was the Zeta Project. We got him for one episode. It was a recurring character, but he maybe because of the story he didn't come back. We'll see. But I was outside my body. When I walked to the green room before the recording to introduce myself, and here I am, the showrunner. I was a stammering fool, where because maybe if your audiences don't know, like there was that time, when I was a kid, and you and I are close to the same age, that he was one of the biggest stars in the world.
Was huge. He was
an international movie star.
Huge, yeah, absolutely.
And so I met Mr. Segal. It's so great to meet you. It's just even the shaking your hand now and having you on the show is instantly one of the highlights of my career. and he's surprisingly tall. I don't know his height exactly, but he's over 6 feet and one of these guys who you don't know it because it's proportional. So he's built like a wall. And so he's already like kind of leaning down to talk to me, and he just kind of he looks, he smiles as I'm saying all this, and eventually he cuts in and says, "Oh, that's very nice. What'd you have for lunch?" And I just think, chicken? And he goes, "Oh, that's interesting. I had a ham sandwich." And it was just and obviously he'd experienced this 1,000 times in his life, and he just knew how to diffuse it. He knew how to become a person again for you.
He had no interest in being a star at that moment at all.
He certainly had no interest in being drooled on. So just get it over with. And here I am, a human being. Here you are, a human being. What can we bond? Immediately associate with one another. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. We're both coming from lunch. What did you eat? And it just broke all of it. And I think it was a brilliant move on his part.
Well, clearly he had, as you say, he had been through it before. In my career, I'm not going to go through any of it, but I definitely had the privilege of working with some very famous people over time, and it took me the first few of those. It took me a few of those before it really dawned on me. Well, they're just people. They get up in the morning. They put their pants on one leg at a time. They have headaches, and they wake up and don't feel well, and all the things that you and I go through. So, but it took a while because they're celebrities, and we think of them as being something other than just an ordinary people.
Right.
So it's a curious phenomenon, stardom. I think about stars and the challenges of walking down a street and everybody knows who you are, but you don't know who anybody is. That must be a very strange thing to do.
It is very, very weird. Celebrity, I don't want it. Walking around Comic-Con with famous people, which I've had the opportunity to do, is it cures you of any interest in being a celebrity. You really learn to, I never wanted to be, known for, by name. I'm thrilled. I've been very lucky that, I could barely count the people who have seen my work. And that's the celebrity I want. That people know Batman, that people know Elementary.
Absolutely.
I don't need them to know my name.
Absolutely. And millions of people have seen your work. They don't know who you are. They don't know you personally.
And that's a pretty good combination.
That's a good, and I've had the really great good fortune of my one famous show being a musical called Jekyll and Hyde, and it's been seen by millions of people all over the world in all kinds of languages, and nobody knows who I am for sure, and I'm happy with that.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you.
Someone it's a funny thing. I never remember whether it was Tom Hanks or Paul Reiser. It's one of the two. Said, if you think you want to be rich and famous, try rich first. See if that doesn't work.
I'll take the rich over fame any day. Bob, last question. You've already given us tons of great advice here today, but do you have a single tip or solid piece of advice that you can lend to those who are trying to make their way into the industry? Not that you haven't already given us like 40 of them.
Well, yeah, the one thing, and you'll see that it's kind of it's resonant with all the little stories that we've discussed along the way, is always take the long view.
That's great.
That the career takes time, it takes effort. This hill you're fighting on right now, whatever it is, isn't as big or important as it seems like right now.
Mm-hmm.
This script isn't the only script you're ever going to write. This job isn't the only job you're ever going to be up for. You're not going to live or die on how this meeting goes, or on whether you get to meet this person. And it took me a long time to learn this myself. I, as you can hear from the George Segal story, was a bumbling, nervous idiot a lot of the times in my career.
Mm-hmm.
The answer to almost every problem along the way, when it's it is what's the long view of this? What's the answer if I'm focusing on the career, not this moment?
I think that's incredibly sound piece of advice that that many people have a hard time with because they need to have it now. And that can kill you because it is a long game. It's not a short game. And there are lots of pieces to it. And, not everybody's going to have the good fortune you've had where you've only worked on a handful of shows over an entire career and it's been longevity. So you have to think the long game and how do you keep playing down the road. I think. Yeah,
there's, and by the way, there are ups and downs to, there are pros and cons to the only working on with 3 groups that I have.
Sure.
The flip side for me is I've met way fewer people.
Sure.
Which makes it harder to get the next job.
Yeah,
but what I was going to mention is there are people who have been on lots and lots of shows. Maybe in the time that I, worked with 3 different groups, people have worked on 20, 30 shows. They've also had wonderful careers, and part of the trick for them is looking at it as a career.
Yeah, that's right.
Most television shows get canceled in their first year. You can't think about that show as the important thing. It's your career as a writer.
Well, I'm an example of that. I worked in animation for 25 years, more or less, and I worked on 34 different series, and I was only on staff once for 2 years at Disney. So I was mostly freelance. And you look at people like Len Yulee and folks that and they've made a career out of many, many, many shows. So that's more typical, and so you have to take that long perspective. So I'm glad that you said that because without it, you suddenly think, well, everything's dried up, but no, something's around the corner probably. So. Bob, I can't thank you enough for coming on StoryBeat today. This has been terrific to have you on the show and to hear your perspective on how you can have such a great career, and I appreciate your coming on.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.